The sun was a red coin slipping behind the jagged hills when Clara May realized her father wasn't coming back. She stood ankle-deep in dying grass, dusted with grit that stung her eyes and clung to her lashes like ash. The wind howled across the open plain, dragging her hair in wild knots. Her small hands clutched the thin wool shawl tighter around her shoulders. A mile down the road, a rickety wagon lurched farther into the distance, each turn of its wheels echoing in her ears like a funeral bell. He hadn't even turned around. No farewell, no scolding, just a muttered curse that morning, a slap that left her cheek smarting, and then a shove from the wagon bed into the dirt. The mule had died the night before, too old, too thirsty, and her father blamed her. God's punishment, he spat. Always were cursed. Then he hitched what little remained to his back and trudged on alone. Now the last gold rays faded from the sky. A cold purple swallowed the land. Clara blinked hard. She wasn't going to cry. Not again. Not where the wind could see. A low growl pulled her attention to the horizon. Coyotes. Distant, but closer than comfort allowed. Her heart raced. She glanced down. The canteen he'd left her was empty. The bread, a crust, really, had vanished hours ago. Her stomach ached like a fist pressing against her spine. Still she walked. The dirt road was little more than 2 wagon tracks, marked with old hoof prints and scattered bones. She tried to follow them, but her boots, too small now, rubbed raw against her heels. Every few feet she staggered. The world tilted. The stars blinked open one by one. She remembered Mama's voice in that moment, soft and faded like an oldham. If you ever find yourself alone, Clara May, you keep walking. Even if the ground steals your breath. You walk. So she did. Hours passed. Or minutes. Time blurred into footfalls and wind and silence. Her legs trembled. Her lips cracked. She collapsed more than once, pushing herself up again with dirt-caked hands. Finally, near a dry creek bed, her knees buckled and didn't rise. The earth met her cheek with a thud, and she lay still. The sky above stretched endless and cruel. Cold crept into her bones. But something stirred in the dark. At first she thought it was wind again, or her mind playing tricks. Then came the soft crunch of footsteps, measured, cautious. Clara didn't dare lift her head. She curled inward, heart hammering. The figure stopped a few feet away. Boots, no moccasins, padded across the dirt. She felt his presence before she saw him. A man tall, silent, with braids trailing over his shoulders and a deerskin cloak dark against the night. He crouched beside her. Clara's breath caught. He wasn't like any settler she'd known. His skin was bronze, weathered. His eyes were deep as canyon shadows. He didn't speak. He just watched her calmly, as if she were a riddle the wind had carried to him. Then he reached into a leather pouch and pulled out a small gourd. He uncorked it and held it to her lips. Water. Cool, clean water. She hesitated. He nodded once. So she drank. Slowly. Greedily. And then, with trembling fingers, pushed it away. "Why?" she whispered, though it came out as a rasp. "Why help me?" He said nothing, but his gaze drifted to the horizon, back the way she'd come. He must have seen the tracks. The wagon. The truth written in the dirt and the bruises on her arms. Still, he didn't leave. She tried to sit up, wincing as her bones protested. The stranger rose and moved to a nearby shrub. In moments he had kindled a small fire, smoke-thin, controlled. He laid strips of rabbit meat on a flat stone near the flame. The scent made her stomach lurch with hunger. He offered her a piece. She looked at him again, cautious. But there was no anger in him, no cruelty, just silence, like he was listening to the land around them. Clara took the food. The fire crackled. Coyotes howled again, farther now. The man didn't flinch. He carved a symbol into the dirt beside him with a stick. A circle and a line through it. She didn't know what it meant. "Are you?" she paused. "Comanche." A brief nod. "I'm Clara," she added softly, unsure why. He didn't reply. Instead, he reached into a pouch and drew out something small. A buffalo tooth, strung with a strip of worn leather. He held it out. Clara stared. For me. Another nod. She took it. The leather was warm from his skin. Something about it comforted her. Like Mama's old him again. That night, she curled close to the fire while the Comanche sat upright, unmoving, eyes scanning the shadows. She drifted between sleep and wakefulness, the scent of smoke and leather settling into her dreams. At some point, she stirred and saw him still awake, still watching. She whispered, "Are you going to leave too?" His head turned, and for the first time he spoke, his voice low and thick with accent. No, just that. She believed him. And that was the first time since her mother's death that Clara May felt safe. Not because the fire burned bright, or because she had food in her belly, but because someone had seen her worth saving, and stayed. Above them, stars spun slow across the velvet sky. The wind softened. And in the hush of the frontier night, something unspoken passed between a broken girl and a quiet warrior. A beginning neither of them had planned, but one the land would remember. The morning arrived slow and gray, as if the sun itself hesitated to touch the wounded earth. Clara woke with her arms curled tight around herself, the buffalo tooth pressing into her palm. The fire had died down to smoldering coals, and the stranger was no longer by her side. Her chest tightened. She sat up quickly, scanning the barren landscape. Nothing moved but the wind and a lone hawk drifting above the sagebrush. Then she saw him, just beyond the dry creek bed, crouched low, his hand pressed against the ground. The Comanche. She rose, legs stiff, and walked toward him. He glanced up as she neared but didn't speak. His fingers traced the outline of hoofprints in the dirt, sharp and recent. "Someone was here?" she asked. He nodded. 2 horses. 1 wagon. Man with rifle. Her heart dropped. "My father." He stood, wiping his hand on his tunic. Not alone. Others behind. A band of men? Her father wouldn't ride with company unless he lied. Maybe he wasn't planning to leave her behind forever. Maybe he sold her. The thought struck cold. Clara followed him as he turned toward a ridge, where he scanned the horizon with narrowed eyes. They ride north. Fast. Are we following? He studied her then, the way a man might study a map before choosing the hard trail. We move east. Safer. She wanted to argue, wanted to scream that she wasn't weak. But something in his voice, calm and certain, quieted her. They packed quickly. No words were wasted. He gave her half the remaining dried meat and showed her how to tie the leather strap around her wrist. It was a crude compass, he said. Sun on right, walk straight. He gave her a name to call him. Tokay, though he didn't offer what it meant. It settled on her tongue like a secret. They moved like shadows across the terrain, low through gullies and beneath the cover of stunted trees. Clara's body ached with every step, but she didn't complain. Tokay didn't slow, and she wouldn't give him reason to leave her behind. Not again. By midday, the land had turned to jagged stone and ghost grass. The air carried the distant scent of smoke, thin, acrid, almost hidden. Tokay stopped abruptly, raising a hand. His eyes narrowed. She sniffed the wind. That's not campfire, is it? No. They crept toward a bluff and peered down. What lay beneath froze her in place. Ashes. A circle of scorched earth and crumpled tents, blackened bones. The remnants of a Comanche camp. Horses lay twisted, their bodies riddled with bullet wounds. The silence was total, like the world had drawn a breath and refused to let it go. Tokay said nothing. His jaw clenched. His chest rose and fell, slow but heavy. Clara reached for his arm. He didn't flinch, but he didn't look at her either. "This was your home?" she asked. He finally nodded. "Some here, family." A lump rose in her throat. She thought of her mother's grave, now likely swallowed by weeds and thorns. Loss wasn't always loud. Sometimes it sat quiet beside you and refused to leave. Clara knelt beside a charred cradleboard, half buried in ash. She didn't speak, just traced the edge of the wood. Her fingers trembled. "I'm sorry." Tokay turned, eyes hard. "White men did this." She didn't argue. They buried what they could. Not for ritual. There was no time. But out of respect, Clara helped cover a child's bones with rocks, her hands shaking but steady. Later, When the sun dipped low again, they camped by a narrow stream. Tokay said nothing the entire evening, not even when Clara offered him food. That night, as the stars bloomed above, she finally spoke. "Do you think it was him?" "My father." Tokay didn't look up from where he sharpened a stone blade. He wouldn't, she stopped. No, he would. He'd sell his own daughter if someone paid enough. He raised his eyes then. "He sell you?" She nodded once. Silence. Then, "You not like him?" She wasn't sure if it was a comfort or a warning. But it was the first thing he'd said to her in hours, and it made the night feel a little less hollow. The next morning, the quiet broke. They had just crested a low ridge when Tokay stopped abruptly and dropped to one knee. He held out his hand, palm down. Clara froze behind him. Below, along the ravine path, a rider. 2, no 3. Dirty clothes, rifles slung lazy across shoulders. The way they rode wasn't cautious. It was arrogant. Clara whispered, "Them?" Tokay didn't answer. He pulled her back behind a rock outcrop. Then he unstrapped his bow and notched an arrow. His body shifted from stillness to tension in a blink. One of the riders dismounted to relieve himself near the trail, spitting into the dust. Another man chuckled, voice carrying on the wind. "Ain't no one out here but bones and buzzards. That girl's probably coyote food by now." Clara's stomach turned. Tokay's fingers twitched on the bowstring. She leaned close. "They're tracking us." His nod was barely perceptible. The man below shouted again. "Boss says she's worth more alive. For the Apache, get her anyhow." Laughter. Then movement. One of them drew a flask and took a swig. Tokay didn't fire. Not yet. Then one of the horses caught their scent and bucked. The lead rider raised his head, scanning the rocks. "Did you hear that?" Clara's breath stopped. The shot came fast. Tokay's arrow struck the dismounted man through the chest. He dropped without a word. The others cursed, drawing their weapons. One fired blindly toward the rocks. Bullets sparked against stone. Tokay grabbed Clara and pulled her into a hollow beneath the ledge. He handed her a stone knife. "Stay." She wanted to argue. She didn't. Not this time. He vanished into the trees like smoke. Gunfire echoed. Shouts. Then a scream. And silence. After minutes that felt like lifetimes, Tokay returned. Blood on his sleeve, but none of it his. His bow was gone, broken in the struggle. But he carried something else. A torn strip of canvas marked with her father's initials. Clara stared at it. "I knew it," she said, voice flat. "He sent them." Tokay met her eyes. "He not done." She nodded slowly. "Neither are we." The sky overhead began to darken. Storm clouds, maybe, or something worse. But Clara stood taller than she had yesterday, stronger. Something in her had hardened in the ashes and begun to burn. Snow had come early that year. It fell in whispers through the skeletal branches, covering the wounds of the land in a quiet white shroud. Clara huddled beneath a deer-hide cloak as flakes danced on her lashes. Every breath curled into the air like a ghost. The fire they built in the hollow of a windbreak was small, cautious. They were being hunted. Tokay knelt beside the flames, sharpening a piece of flint until it was thin and cruel-edged. His movements were measured, efficient, the same way he moved through everything: grief, danger, silence. Clara had learned his rhythms now. She could read his quiet, feel the change in his breathing when he sensed a shift in the wind. She hadn't spoken of her father since the last ambush. There was nothing more to say. The torn canvas marked with her family's brand, B.M. Barnabas Ezra May, had said enough. Her father wasn't finished with her. Not until she was returned or buried. But Clara wasn't the same girl he'd left to die. She looked at her hands now, stained with dirt, smoke, and the blood of the wounded bandit she'd helped drag behind the rocks last night. Her fingers no longer trembled. She slept with the knife under her chest. She'd stopped asking Tokay if he thought they'd survive. They both already knew. Survival wasn't a question anymore. It was a choice they'd already made. The fire sputtered as the wind rose. Tokay stood, looking west toward the ridgeline. Smoke curled up on the horizon, thin and distant, but unmistakable. Another camp. Yours? Clara asked. His jaw tightened. Not anymore. They moved before sunrise, tracing deer paths through the trees. Tokay's horse, a patient roan mare with one blind eye, carried their supplies. Clara walked, her boots patched with sinew and prayer. Her body had become something she recognized less as a child's and more like the earth, weathered, cut, alive in its ache. As they crested a bluff, she saw it, another Comanche camp, or what was left of one. Smoke still rose, though the fires had long since cooled. Corpses littered the clearing, men, women, children. Some burned, others shot in the back. The snow did little to hide the blood. Clara's breath caught. Her hand went to the buffalo tooth on her wrist. Tokay stepped into the open like a man returning to a graveyard that once held his name. He said nothing, just knelt beside a woman's body, cradled in the arms of a younger girl whose face was scorched beyond recognition. He reached into his coat and pulled something out, a red braid, bound with a copper ring. Clara stepped closer, then stopped. Who was she? Tokay didn't look up. My sister. Clara said nothing. The wind howled through the trees like a choir of ghosts. She could hear the rage in him, not loud, not screaming, just present, cold and sharp, like the knife in his belt. They buried the bodies they could. Clara dug with her hands when they ran out of tools. When blood seeped from her cracked knuckles, she wiped it on her skirt and kept going. When they finished, the sky had darkened to a deep iron gray. We can't let this keep happening, she said softly. We can't just run. Tokay stared into the woods. He'll never stop, she added. Not until someone stops him. He turned to her. There was something different in his eyes now, not just grief, resolve. He is not hunter now, Tokay said. We are. Clara nodded. That night, they left the ridge and followed the trail of the raiders. Tracks were clumsy, drunk with confidence. Her father's men weren't hiding anymore. They believed the girl was either dead or broken, and that no Comanche would risk another fight. They were wrong on both counts. By the second day, the snow thickened. They moved slower, but kept to the tree line. At dawn on the third day, they spotted the camp. 5 men, all heavily armed. 1 wagon tarped. A fire pit roaring. Horses tied lazily. One of the men laughed loud, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. Clara peered through the branches. That's him. Tokay didn't ask which. He saw the way her body stiffened, the way her breath hitched. Barnabas Ezra May stood with a bottle in one hand and a rifle in the other. His beard was longer now, his eyes meaner. There wasn't an ounce of regret in the way he spoke about her, loud enough for the others to hear. Girls cursed, he said, throwing a bone into the fire. Was from the start. Let the land take her, I say. And if it didn't, we'll do it right this time. The others chuckled. Clara didn't move. Her face was carved stone. We go now? Tokay asked. She looked at him. No. We wait. Night fell like a blanket soaked in blood. The wind turned bitter. One of the men wandered off to piss and didn't return. Another went looking and didn't come back either. Panic set in around the fire. Tokay struck fast, silent, one arrow after another in the dark. By the time the last man drew his gun, Clara was already moving through the trees. She stepped into the clearing, snow crunching beneath her boots. Her father spun, rifle aimed, but the firelight flickered across her face, and he froze. Clara. She kept walking. You're alive? She stopped just feet away, her eyes locked on his. Disappointed. He lowered the rifle slightly. I did what I had to. World's no place for weak blood. I'm not weak, she said. Not anymore. He sneered. You think that savage made you strong? She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled the buffalo tooth from her wrist and held it out. Do you know what this is? She asked. He didn't reply. It's what someone gave me when no one else thought I was worth saving. When you left me to die. His lip curled. Don't preach, girl. She nodded slowly, then dropped the tooth into the snow. I'm not here to preach. Her voice was calm when she said it. So Comet made him hesitate. That's when Tokay stepped from the shadows. Barnabas turned, rifle raising, but he was too slow. One throw, one blade. The Comanche knife sank deep into his shoulder, and he cried out, falling to one knee. His rifle clattered into the snow. Clara stepped closer. You taught me the land, didn't owe me anything. That love was weakness. That kindness got you killed. He growled, blood pouring down his arm. I believed you, she said, for a long time. Then she knelt beside him. But you were wrong. She stood and turned away. Kill me then, he spat. Clara didn't look back. You're not worth the bullet. They left him there, bleeding and howling as the storm rolled in. By morning, the camp was empty. The tracks they left behind pointed east, toward open land, toward something new. Clara didn't know what future waited for her, but she knew she wasn't a victim of it anymore. She was the one who walked forward. The snow erased everything behind them. Blood, tracks, names, but not what had been forged in the fire. The snow had covered the blood by morning. It softened the violence, smoothed over the twisted footprints and broken gear with a hush that seemed almost merciful. But nothing about what happened the night before was silent inside Clara May. She stood on the edge of the dead fire pit, arms wrapped tight around her ribs, watching the wind erase every trace of her father's camp. Tokay didn't speak. He was at the tree line, scanning the pale horizon. The world stretched quiet and endless, but Clara could feel it humming beneath her boots. Something was ending. Something else was beginning. She turned back one last time. Her father's blood had painted the snow, his screams swallowed by the wind as they rode away. Whether he bled out or crawled off into the wilderness like a wounded animal, she didn't know. Didn't care. Whatever man had claimed her bloodline had died the moment he saw her and flinched, not from guilt, but from fear. Tokay returned to the horses and offered her the reins. She took them, and they rode. For 2 days, they didn't speak of what had passed. Not out of avoidance, but necessity. The land had grown more unforgiving with each mile, frozen rivers cracking underfoot, wolves trailing far but not far enough, and wind so cold it bit through hide and flesh alike. On the third night, they found a hunter's shack, long abandoned, half buried beneath a collapsed pine. Still, the walls stood, and it gave them shelter. Tokay started a fire while Clara patched the horse's hoof with leather and birch sap. Her fingers moved fast now, skilled. Months ago, she would have cried over a splinter. Now, she'd barely noticed when a knife sliced across her knuckle that morning. When they settled by the flames, she glanced at him. You knew he wouldn't change, she said. Tokay didn't nod, didn't speak, but the set of his jaw confirmed it. I hoped he might beg, she added. But all I saw was hate. Even when he bled, he still hated me. Hate is small, Tokay said. It hides in weak men, grows when no one sees it. Clara poked the fire with a stick. I see it now. He leaned back against the log wall, silent a moment. Then, you did not kill him. Her mouth twitched. Not with steel. He looked at her, finally. No, you killed what he made. The words lodged in her chest. She nodded once and said no more. They spent another day at the shack. Tokay taught her how to read elk signs in the snow, how to hear the difference between wind in the pines and something walking nearby. When she slept, she dreamed of nothing. The nightmares had stopped. By the week's end, they crossed into warmer lands. Spring was still far, but the signs were there, mud beneath the frost, birdsong returning in broken rhythm, ice melting at the edges of stone pools. At a creek where the thaw had begun, they stopped. Clara dismounted and walked barefoot into the frigid water. She let it sting, let it remind her that she was alive. Tokay watched from the bank, arms folded. I'm not going back, she said without turning around. No, I don't know where I'm going. You will. She stepped out, teeth chattering, but her eyes burned bright. I want to ride with you, she said. Help your people. Help stop what happened from happening again. Tokay studied her. Then he tossed her a bundle of leather and hide. A new cloak, Comanche made. She caught it and smiled. They rode south together, across the ridges and ravines where wagons feared to tread. They slept under stars and shared stories only when the fire was small. Tokay told her of his sister, how she'd braided flowers into her hair each spring. Clara told him about her mother's laugh, soft and high like wind chimes. They spoke of memories not to mourn, but to carry forward. One evening, they passed through a valley with fresh wagon ruts. Settlers moving west. Clara stiffened, watching from the tree line. A woman walked beside the lead wagon, face weary, dress torn, carrying a crying baby. Her man shouted at her to hurry. Clara reached for her rifle. Tokay caught her wrist. Not all need bullets. Clara exhaled, then nodded. But she left something behind that night. Half her jerky and a blanket rolled in the crook of a tree near their camp. By morning, it was gone. The weeks passed. One morning, a hawk circled overhead as they approached the open prairie. Tokay stopped and gestured to the horizon. Beyond that, he said, there is no more map. She looked out. Endless grass, golden in the light, moved like an ocean under wind. Clara turned her head. What now? You ride. She hesitated. Alone. No, he said, but no longer as a girl left to die. She blinked, unsure if she was ready. But when he handed her the reins, she took them without flinching. They rode side by side across the open land, two shadows cutting through the dawn. No one left to chase them. No one left to fear. By the time the sun touched the peaks, Clara pulled ahead, laughter slipping from her chest like a bird finally freed. She turned in the saddle, face bright, hair wild in the wind. Tokay gave her a nod, and in that moment it was clear what the snow hadn't buried had bloomed. If you listened close enough to the prairie wind, it would still tell her story of a girl left behind, who became something more than what was ever intended for her. Not just survivor, not just rider, but storm. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. There are more tales from the Wild West, of pain, love, and justice, just waiting to be told.